Everyone's been in the situation before where somebody is complaining about realism in a story when there's a dragon or a spaceship flying overhead, shooting lasers all over the place and at everything. And it honestly seems completely ridiculous to make that criticism. But the truth of the matter is, well, maybe they have a point. And I will be explaining why they actually do have a point, why these people aren't crazy in the rest of this video. I'm the Worldsmith, and I hope that you learned something today. Now, to start tackling why this is an issue at all, we're going to cover 4 or 5 major points. And we'll get to those as we go. Now, the first big reason why people complain about there being some kind of realistic problem in a story where you're going to be having people beaming up from the planet back into the Enterprise, well, it doesn't make sense, right? If something breaks the consistency, the logical consistency of a story, you'll sit there and question why that's a thing. And there are some pretty large factors to this. One, people always have some preconceived notion of law regarding how a story is governed. So what that means is people are going to naturally assume that gravity works the same way in your world as it does in the real world, unless you specify otherwise. Now, when can you specify otherwise? Whenever you want, but you have to specify when you break a natural law. That's why magic and sci-fi magic, which is just technology, which is indistinguishable from magic when it gets advanced enough anyway. That's why it doesn't break the rules for a story. People don't complain about it when Iron Man's flying around in the suit that no one knows how it's actually going to function, because that's an established part of the story. It's a rule set aside. And what that connects to is the second point. The second thing that really causes an issue here is they will have to cease willfully suspending their disbelief in a story. Now, this is closely connected to their rules thing that I just covered. Now, what I mean by that is generally, the concept of the willful suspension of disbelief is somebody, a reader, a watcher, whatever, sits there and sees something that is not real. It's not realistic, it's impossible. But in order to continue enjoying the story, they accept it because that is the new reality for the sake of the story. They can willfully suspend their disbelief in order to proceed. Now, you can do a lot of things that violate this willful suspension of disbelief. You go too far, if you will. But as long as it makes sense in the context of the story, it's very difficult to do this. So normally this is done when you have something that makes logical sense and doesn't break the rules that you set for the story already. But turns out that they're complaining about something. Well, that complaint is because you broke some other rule that was pre-established, or maybe you didn't establish it, but it's a rule of reality as they know it in the real world, right? And if that rule's broken, tough luck. You just broke their willful suspension of disbelief. You broke their preconceived notion of law. You broke logical consistency, which is the third part. You need to apply the same logic about the rules of your world across the board. So if you sit there and at some point say, this particular magic can do this particular thing in this particular way, unless you specify that this particular way is encompassing enough to cover a situation where you use that magic later, if you break those rules, people will remember that. They'll go, wait a minute, that's not how that works. That's not realistic. What they really mean is that breaks the rules. It all comes down to breaking the rules, keeping your logical consistency, and generally staying on topic. Staying on point, keeping something tight. If it breaks rules and it disturbs their preconceived notions in a way that you don't want to, in a way that doesn't work for your story, you want to often challenge preconceived notions, but that is a different issue. We're talking about, here's how the world works. Here's how magic works. Here's how ray guns work. And if you break these rules in some way, people are going to be upset with that. So I believe, I haven't researched into this too much, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's part of the reason why people got so frustrated with that particular scene in The Last Jedi, where they, where the, I don't know what her name is, no one remembers, no one cares, but where that female general that was a bad replacement for Leia turned the ship towards the Imperial Star Destroyer. It's not the Star Destroyer, but it's something else because it has to be bigger. And charges her light speed and destroys the ship. That causes a lot of problems for the logical consistency of Star Wars. If that works, why hasn't it been done before? Why haven't you weaponized light speed in some other way or other path? If it doesn't work, then it worked there, then you just broke the rules that were previously set. And that's a great example. Another general example that's less fantastic that you might see is a more general complaint about realism in a work that is not really that fantastic or sci-fi. So say you're watching an action movie and you have a car plummet off a cliff. Somebody who knows what's going on are expecting it to happen the way that it will happen, and they'll be pleasantly surprised if you do it different. But contrary to what you might believe, cars, when they hit the bottom of a cliff, don't explode. There's no reason for them to explode. There's not enough gas. They might catch on fire, but they're not going to explode. They're just going to sit there and crunch. It takes a lot to make something explode. It's got to have a lot of containment for an expanding force. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to have an explosion. Gas is volatile, but it's not that volatile. When you have a gas fire, it burns unless it's contained. There's nothing there containing the explosion or containing the force of the fire enough to make it explode. And so people will complain about that. This actually relates slightly to a video that I made earlier about people taking too many wounds. It doesn't make any sense. You should be knocked out. That doesn't work. Why are you doing that? That's not realistic. That's not how that works. And there you go. Not how it works. Ties right back into their rules. Ties right back into their logical consistency. Ties right back into their willful suspension of disbelief. That's just how stuff ends up working. Now, there is a scenario where you don't break these three rules, and they still complain about something being unrealistic. And this is also still your fault. This is you, as a writer, have figured out, okay, why does this work? Okay, this is why that works. But you never told anyone. You have to explain your rule breaches. If you do something that breaks the laws of physics, breaks the laws of reality as we know it, and you don't tell us that it works that way, you might as well have just not even tried to explain it internally. There's no purpose to it. It doesn't matter if you can pull it doesn't matter if you can pull a Star Wars and have expanded content to explain why that actually works. It has to be in the main body of work. If it's for real, you can explain it really quickly and it'll be okay. Even a rudimentary explanation will at least give excuse for somebody going, okay, fine, I'll buy that. You still have them willfully suspending their disbelief. You still have them accepting your new rule. And you maintain your logical consistency, but only if you explain why you broke the rule. This is why a lot of magic can seem really unbelievable and wild and inconsistent in what it can accomplish, because you never explained it. You never established what the constraints on that magic, on that power was. And for reference, it doesn't have to be some long, boring expositional thing. It can be in the flow of the story that you explain how it works, but it generally needs to be earlier on in the story, or it feels like a Deus Ex Machina situation if it's solving a problem, or it has to have made sense or be a logical continuity of what was previously established. And there's a lot that you can play with and think through that situation. Now, of course, there's always something to think about with this, but when people complain about realism in sci-fi and fantasy, they sometimes have a point. It's because, when we're recapping if you can't tell, it's because their logical consistency has been violated. Their willful suspension of disbelief, they've been just jerked out of that. Their general beliefs about what the rules of your world were upset because they thought it worked this way and maybe it should work that way. Or maybe it doesn't work that way, but you never told them. And when that happens, there's no one to blame but you. You have to take ownership for it. You made a mistake. People make mistakes. But what if you're aware of the problem on the front end and you can fix it on the front end? That would be nice. Wonder if there's a video for that. Wait. There is now. All right. That's all I got to say to you guys this evening. Guess this is a bit of a shorter video, but that'll be all right. There'll be some longer ones coming. Hope to see you again soon. So, yeah, see you around.